This is an install for the Geisele Super Semi-Auto Enhanced trigger. I just got the mail. I'm going to install this on my DPMS LR308. That's an awful lot of gun to be putting in front of this camera, considering I'm using GoPro and how close it is to the table. But everything that will be done right here on the lower. So I went ahead and popped the rear and forward takedown pins down, remove the upper, and what I have in here already is this is a ALG Combat, ALG Defense Combat trigger. It's a great trigger, but it's not, this rifle I actually have set up to be more of a long distance precision rifle, so you know, the 6, 7, 8 pounds or whatever I'm getting out of this just isn't cutting. I have this same trigger in my both my AR rifle and a couple other ARs that I have, and it's great for that philosophy. However, this particular firearm, I want a much lighter trigger, and I think this Geisele is going to fit the bill. So we're going to go ahead and remove the trigger that's in there. We're going to do that by popping these two pins out right here. And go ahead and release the hammer. You want to be sure to guard that hammer because it can come up and damage your bolt catch right there. So take this pin right here. And I'm just going to pop right out, like so. Yeah, there's that. And that one. And we'll go ahead and same thing with the trigger. All kinds of stuff comes flying out. Pins, and probably a spring. I don't remember if I have to pull the safety selector. Nope, comes right out. That's nice. So yeah, there's the trigger, disconnect, and the hammer. And there we go. That's taken down. We can install the new trigger. I'm going to go ahead and remove the handle and the safety. In the process of messing around with this old trigger and trying to make it what it isn't, you know, I did things like bend the hammer springs. I really wouldn't recommend that you do that. It didn't make very much of a difference. I also tried to shorten the length of pull. I was rather successful actually by installing where there's a bolt that holds the handle in, and that bolt is, or that hole rather, is threaded all the way through and it comes out just above, or below rather, the trigger. And you can put a set screw in there, and you can essentially take up some of the trigger, so you have a shorter pull on the trigger, if that's something you like. It was pretty successful. It wasn't really as short as I wanted it, but I don't know. It was what it was. Obviously, it wasn't that great because I'm changing it out for a better trigger. I've got an Allen bolt in here. Go ahead and undo that. You want to hang on to this handle because there's a couple of springs that are going to come flying out in a second. There we go. There's our bolt and washer. Okay, I'm just going to let this, on this side. These are two springs. Got this one for the rear takedown detent, and this one for the safety detent, safety selector detent. You don't mess with them, they'll probably stay right there depending on how soft the plastic is. If you're ever hard up for a spring for this one, you might be able to use the spring out of a big lighter. Just saying, it's possible. Not that I would know. Anyway, this will just drop right out once you release the tension on the detent. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that and let those fall out. And the big one is for the safety selector, the little one's for the rear takedown pin. And I need to go ahead and remove my genius work with the silly bolt I put in there, which is probably a different size Allen. I'll go ahead and do that off camera. remove the Allen screw. It's a very, very small Allen screw, or set screw. It's a 1/4-28 if you care to try that on your own. So with the Geisele triggers, you don't need to remove the safety. So I'm going to put this back together to the point where you would have torn it down. So you get a little bit of extra instruction with this one, with this video. So we're going to go ahead and put the safety selector back in. Just drops right back in. Doesn't matter where it's at. Go ahead and put it there. And we're going to put the safety selector detent. You notice this hole is a little bit bigger. Open that up and put our safety detent in there. Use a spring to kind of push it into place. And that'll hold that in there for now. We have our rear takedown detent. And drop that in its home. I'm going to put the spring in behind it. I'll make sure that it's lined up properly. You see the slot on the bottom of the rear takedown pin. And I can't turn it, and that's because that detent is hanging out, hanging out in the groove. Okay, so we've put those parts in there, and it's really all it is. This is the safety selector detent spring that just goes in the hole in the handle. And well, that fell out. I guess I should have held that in place. I have to move that out of the way so I can get the safety selector in back where it was supposed to go. I'm just going to hold it very gently on the back side. Put those things in there. The springs lined up in their appropriate locations. Put the screw. Now a lot of ARs are going to come with, instead of an Allen head screw, they're going to come with a slotted screw. And whoever did that kind of needs a slap to the back of the head. I'm trying to do this with a slotted screwdriver. It really isn't fun. There we go. Let's get that started in there. I'm holding this with my left hand. I'm holding the handle to the lower receiver. Couple of twists, starting to snug up. I can let go, and that's about as tight as it really needs to be. Nice and snug. There we go. And make sure that it functions. Fire, safe, and our rear takedown works just fine. I'm going to leave that in so it's out of the way. So we started this video with this lower receiver completely assembled. I removed these pieces. This is as far as I would have, as you would need to disassemble this lower receiver to install the Geisele trigger. Inside the bag, we have a trigger and disconnector, the disconnector spring and the trigger spring. And then we have the hammer spring. And there's 3 more items in here. We have a slave pin and hammer and trigger pins. Now the hammer and trigger pins are both identical. And they have 2 grooves in them. And then the slave pin. And what the slave pin is for, I don't particularly care to use it, but the slave pin is for when you drop the trigger and disconnector in. So this is, you know, it's just a separate piece. So it's to help you line these 2 holes up. So you would insert the slave pin just like that, somewhere in there. There you go. we install the slave pin just like that, drop the trigger in, hammer the new pins through, and we'll keep everything lined up for you during your installation. Normally I don't use it, but since I just put that in for a demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So this is the first piece to go in. Before I do that, there's the lubrication that came with the Geisele trigger, and per the instructions we're going to go ahead and use that. Let's use my scale tool. Love this thing. Carries with me all the time. You guys gonna laugh if I cut my finger open right now? You know, I'm not the brightest guy in the world. Apparently all I have to do is just open the end that's already open. You don't have to slice through the really thick plastic. Alright, so I'm going to use a pin punch. I'm going to move this out a little bit, not so far as I undo the work that I did to align the disconnect and the trigger. And I guess I'll just use the pin punch. Get a dab of this assembly lube here. And we're going to put that in the hole. Probably don't need a whole lot. I'm putting it on this side because this is the side that I'm going to put it in like this and put the pin through this way. So as the pin goes through, the actual pin, not the slave pin, it's going to take that lubrication with it. And you also want to lubricate the sear surfaces. And put some of that there, and then also on the disconnector. It likes a little bit of lube too. And this is of course on a Geisele recommendation. If you take the literature, of course they go through and tell you that you're responsible for your own safety, and if you shoot yourself, then well, maybe you shouldn't have installed the trigger, blah blah blah. And there's that. They tell you what the parts are: trigger pin, hammer pin, lubrication points. So sear surface, disconnector surface, and of course the other half of the sear surface there. Okay, we got this one done. I'm going to go ahead and put some more on the secondary sear. Now, the cool thing about Geisele triggers is the secondary sear. So just like a stock, this, even though it's an ALG trigger, it says how a stock trigger is designed, right? And this is your sear surface here. So when you pull the trigger, it lets go right there, and this hammer goes forward. And of course, it hits the firing pin, strikes the primer, etc. With the Geisele trigger, the primary sear is this surface here, but it's set up, the geometry is just such that if that fails, then it catches the secondary sear here. So if this system up here fails, it fails to a stock trigger. So I just think that's pretty awesome to have a backup plan, you know. It's pretty rad. All right, so I'm talking too much. Let's get on with it here. All right, so there you go. We have the assembly lube on all the appropriate places. We're going to go ahead and just drop that right on in. And of course, you want to make sure that these legs of the spring are forward of the trigger hole. So it helps have all your stuff lined up. I don't usually use the slave pin. Alright, that drops right into place. You see it's a little bit springy there. Just going to push down on that, try and line up our holes. We can see the slave pin right there, or rather the assembly lube that we put on there. Go ahead and line up this pen. Your hammer. And that goes right through. And there's our slave pen out the other side. Lots of lubrication on it, I might add. The trigger installed, we can move on to the hammer. The hammer, the lubrication points are inside the pivot hole and on both sides of the this side of the sear and also that side where the disconnector interacts with it. So I'll go ahead and grab some of this stuff. Bunch seemed to work pretty well last time, so we'll try that again. Put a big old glob in there. And there's some on here from when I was showing you guys the interactions earlier. Sticky stuff. This assembly lube. Nice generous helping. Alright, so what I'm going to do is we're going to push these pins here go on top of the trigger pin. So I'm going to put it in there, I'm going to push it forward and rotate it in like that, and I'm going to try and line up the hole. I'm going to stick this in there to hold it, and then we can work with it from there. So that was just like that. Make sure that the legs of the spring are on the correct side of the trigger. It has a strong spring. There we go, like that. Sorry, I had to push it against my chest, got a little bit off camera. So the other cool thing about it, when you have the pin in there, you can move it around and help align it, just like that. I really seem to want to align very well. Careful, you don't want to, you have this on safe right now so it doesn't drop the hammer. That's assuming it's a safety. If you drop the hammer, you risk damaging your bolt catch. And that's not the easiest part to put in. So I would rather not have to take that apart if I didn't have to. So the Geisele pens are a little bit wider than the receiver. So usually with pens, you look at both sides and they should be slightly recessed on each side. This one should be sticking out a little bit on each side. A couple more taps, get it to where I want. And just sticking out a little bit on each side. That's what we want. With all the parts installed, it's time to do a safety function check. With the AR style platform, it's the AR-15. This is an LR308, which is practically, with a few minor differences, an AR-10. The hammer and trigger is all the same parts, and the function check is the same. So with it cocked, the hammer cocked in the cocked position there, I'm going to go ahead and, with it on safety, I want to pull the trigger. You want to guard this because you don't know if it's going to work or not. It's the purpose of a function check. You're going to pull the trigger and you don't want the hammer to go up. So I'm pulling the trigger and it's performing correctly. It's on safe. I pull the trigger, the hammer doesn't drop. I'm going to go ahead and switch it to fire. and I'm pretty sure it's going to drop the hammer, so I'm going to be ready for it. We're going to pull the trigger. Oh, it's smooth. It's nice. There's the wall, and then it should break, and it releases the hammer. Now, I'm keeping pressure on the trigger. I want it back for the purposes of the function check to simulate the cycling of the firearm. So the bolt comes back, cocks the hammer. It should be caught on the disconnect now, which I can visually confirm that it's caught on the disconnect. Now I'm going to release the trigger, and when I do, the hammer is going to come up slightly. It should go from being caught on the disconnect to being caught on the sear, and that should be it. But I'm going to be ready to catch it in case it doesn't catch the sear. So I'm going to go ahead and slowly release that, and that's it. That's our trigger reset. And I should be able to, and I'm not putting any pressure on the hammer, I should be able to pull the trigger again. Oh, it's so nice. This is so worth the money for this Geisele trigger. And there we go. And there we go. That's our function check. Thanks for dropping by 5-9 Tactical. Once again, this is Mike. You guys have a great evening.